In 1972, a truck stop outside Barstow, California, served 400 chicken fried steaks in a single weekend. The cook was a woman named Dolores Medina. She had been frying steaks at that counter since 1961. The truckers called her Mama D on the CB radio. Number 12 is her signature dish. Number 18 cost $1.35 and came with a biscuit the size of your fist. Number 9 was invented by Army cooks and became the most loved and hated meal on every truck stop counter in America. These 25 meals were designed for men and women running 14-hour shifts across state lines, eating at 2 in the morning in places where the coffee never stopped. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down 25 forgotten truck stop meals that were too delicious to disappear. Number 25. Chicken fried chicken. Before chicken fried steak became the icon, there was chicken fried chicken. A boneless breast pounded flat, dredged in seasoned flour, dipped in egg, and fried until the crust crackled when you cut into it. The cream gravy came from the same pan. Truck stops along Interstate 35 in Oklahoma served this as a lunch special for $2.95 in 1978. The chicken hung over the edge of the plate because the portions were built for men who had been driving since dawn. By the 1990s, most truck stops replaced it with pre-breaded frozen patties that cooked faster and cost less. The crust was never the same. The gravy disappeared entirely. Your plate got smaller and the price went up. Number 24. Open-face roast beef sandwich. 2 slices of white bread laid flat on a plate. Thick-cut roast beef piled high. Mashed potatoes on the side. The whole thing drowned in brown gravy until you could not see the bread anymore. In the Midwest, they called this a hot beef Manhattan. By the 1960s, it had become the default lunch at every truck stop from Indianapolis to Omaha. A place called the Crossroads Diner outside Lincoln, Nebraska, sold 200 of these every Saturday for $1.25 each. The beef came from a roast that had been slow cooking since 5 in the morning. The gravy was made from the drippings. You ate it with a fork and a knife, and you left full enough to drive another 300 miles without thinking about food. That was the whole point. Number 23. Fried catfish plate. South of the Mason-Dixon line, a truck stop without catfish on the menu was not a truck stop. It was a gas station that happened to have chairs. The catfish came dredged in cornmeal, not flour, and fried until the outside turned golden and the inside stayed white and flaky. The plate came with coleslaw, hush puppies, and a slice of white bread. Along Highway 61 in Mississippi, truck stops charged $2.50 for an all-you-can-eat catfish plate on Friday nights in 1975. Truckers planned their routes around it. They would drive an extra 40 miles to hit the right stop on the right night. By the 2000s, the independent stops that served wild-caught river catfish closed one by one, and the frozen fillets that replaced them tasted like nothing at all. Number 22. Hash and eggs. This was the 3 in the morning meal. The meal that separated a real truck stop from a place that just sold diesel. Corned beef hash from a can, spread flat on a griddle until the edges crisped, topped with 2 fried eggs and served with toast. A cook at a truck stop in Flagstaff, Arizona, named Roy Beckett, served this plate 30 times a night during the 1960s. He cracked eggs with one hand while flipping hash with the other. The meal cost 85 cents. The coffee was free if you were a regular. By 1985, Roy had retired and the truck stop became a chain. The hash went from canned to frozen to microwaved. The eggs went from fried to ordered to scrambled in a bag. And the meal survived in name only. Number 21. Breaded veal cutlet. In the 1950s, veal was not a luxury. It was the cheap cut that butchers sold to diners for less than $1 a pound. A thin cutlet, pounded flat, breaded with cracker crumbs and pan-fried in butter until golden. Served with spaghetti and red sauce or mashed potatoes and canned peas. German and Austrian immigrants brought the Wiener Schnitzel tradition to America, and truck stops in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin served their own version for decades. A veal cutlet dinner outside Allentown, Pennsylvania, cost $1.50 in 1962. By the 1980s, the price of veal tripled. Animal welfare concerns made it controversial. The cutlets disappeared from truck stop menus and never came back. Most drivers under 40 have never seen one on a plate. Number 20. Smothered pork chops. 2 bone-in pork chops browned in a skillet, then covered with sliced onions and a thick gravy made from the pan drippings. The lid went on and the whole thing simmered for 45 minutes until the meat fell off the bone. Truck stops in the Deep South served this with rice and collard greens. A plate cost $2.75 in 1974 at a truck stop outside Montgomery, Alabama. The pork chops came from a local butcher, not a Sysco truck. The rice was cooked in the gravy, not in water. When the chains took over in the 1990s, the smothered pork chops disappeared. You cannot smother a pork chop in a microwave. You cannot make onion gravy from a packet. Some meals only exist when someone stands at a stove long enough to make them. Number 19. Coconut cream pie. This was not a meal. This was the reason you stopped. Every truck stop worth its name had a rotating pie case by the register, and the coconut cream pie sold out first. A buttery crust filled with thick vanilla custard, topped with meringue toasted until the peaks turned golden. A truck stop outside Joplin, Missouri, on Route 66, sold 40 pies a week in the 1960s. A slice cost 35 cents. The baker, a woman named Helen Driscoll, arrived at 4 in the morning to make the custard from scratch. When Helen retired in 1978, the owner tried a supplier. The truckers stopped ordering. The pie case went dark. A slice of coconut cream pie from scratch takes 2 hours. A slice from a box takes 2 minutes. The difference is everything. Number 18. Pot roast plate. A chuck roast braised for 4 hours with carrots, potatoes, onions, and enough beef broth to fill a Dutch oven. Served on an oval plate with a ladle of the cooking liquid poured over the top and a dinner roll on the side. This was the blue plate special at truck stops across the Great Plains in the 1960s and 1970s. The Platter Restaurant at the Bosselman Truck Plaza outside North Platte, Nebraska, served this for $1.35 in 1970. A driver could sit down at noon, eat a pot roast dinner with 2 cups of coffee, leave a quarter tip, and walk out having spent less than $2. The pot roast required something that no chain restaurant would invest: time. 4 hours of low heat. A cook who checked the oven instead of a timer. That was the secret nobody could replicate. Not the seasoning, not the recipe, the patience. When truck stops started replacing their kitchens with fast food counters in the late 1980s, the pot roast was the first thing to go. You cannot braise a chuck roast in a drive-through window. A pot roast took 4 hours to cook and 20 minutes to eat. A burger took 4 minutes and was eaten in the cab. The food industry chose speed. The drivers lost a meal that tasted like someone cared whether they ate well or not. That was the real cost. Not the beef, not the labor. The disappearance of a plate that said you are worth 4 hours of someone's attention. Number 17. Chili and cornbread. Not the competition chili with artisan peppers and craft beer. The truck stop kind. Ground beef, kidney beans, canned tomatoes, onion, and enough chili powder to make your forehead sweat. Cooked in a pot that never fully cooled because the next batch started before the last one was finished. The cornbread came from a cast iron skillet, golden on the bottom, crumbly on top. A bowl of chili and a square of cornbread cost $1.10 at a truck stop in Amarillo, Texas in 1968. The chili pot sat on the back burner 24 hours a day. Truckers ate it at midnight and at 6 in the morning, and it tasted the same both times. In a life spent eating at a different counter every night, that predictability was a kind of comfort. Number 16. Country ham and eggs. A thick slice of dry, cured country ham, fried in a skillet until the edges curled, and the fat rendered into a salty, smoky perfume that filled the entire dining room. 2 eggs fried in the ham fat. Toast or biscuits. Truck stops in Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky served this for breakfast, lunch, and dinner because truckers did not care what time it was. They cared that the ham was real. A country ham breakfast cost $1.85 at a truck stop outside Knoxville in 1971. The ham came from a smokehouse, not a plastic package. You could taste the hickory. You could taste the cure. By the 1990s, Country ham became a specialty item. The truck stop switched to thin-sliced deli ham that cooked faster and cost a third as much. The plate looked the same. The taste did not. Number 15. Hot turkey sandwich. This was the Thanksgiving meal you could order any night of the week. Sliced roasted turkey laid over white bread, covered with mashed potatoes and turkey gravy, with a side of cranberry sauce from a can. The can left ridges in the sauce, and nobody pretended otherwise. Truck stops in the Northeast and Midwest served this as a dinner special. A hot turkey sandwich at a truck stop outside Syracuse, New York, cost $2.25 in 1976. The turkey was roasted in-house every morning and sliced to order. For a trucker 800 miles from home on Thanksgiving night, this was as close to a family dinner as the road could offer. It was not home, but the gravy was hot and the plate was full, and the waitress called you Hon. That was enough. Number 14. Meatloaf dinner. 2 thick slices of meatloaf glazed with ketchup and baked until the edges caramelized. Mashed potatoes, brown gravy, green beans or corn, a dinner roll. That was the truck stop meatloaf dinner, and it was the most popular blue plate special in America from the 1940s through the 1970s. The meatloaf was made from ground beef and ground pork, bound with breadcrumbs and egg. The recipe came from the same place every diner cook learned it. From their mother. A meatloaf dinner cost $1.65 at the Iron Skillet chain in 1973. For a driver eating alone at a counter, the meatloaf dinner was the closest thing to a home-cooked meal that money could buy. It did not taste like a restaurant. It tasted like a kitchen. That distinction mattered to people who had not been in their own kitchen for 2 weeks. The chains replaced it with a hamburger steak that took 4 minutes. Same beef, same price, none of the meaning. The meatloaf required an oven and an hour. The hamburger steak required a griddle and impatience. The food industry chose impatience. The drivers lost the one meal that made a truck stop feel like a dining room. The one meal that said, you are not just a customer passing through. You are someone who deserves a dinner that was baked, not grilled. Served on a plate, not a tray. Made by a person who set a timer and waited. Number 13. Beef stew. A pound of stew meat cut into chunks, browned in a Dutch oven, and simmered for 2 hours with potatoes, carrots, onions, and a can of tomatoes. The broth thickened on its own as the potatoes broke down. The meat turned tender enough to cut with a spoon. A bowl of beef stew at a truck stop in Tulsa, Oklahoma, cost $1.40 in 1969. It came with 2 slices of white bread and a glass of iced tea. The stew pot sat on the back of the stove all day. The first bowl at noon was good. The last bowl at midnight was better because the flavors had married and the potatoes had dissolved into the broth. Truckers shared that information on the CB radio the way other people shared stock tips. A good stew at exit 241 was worth more than a clean rest area at exit 260. Number 12. Chicken fried steak. Dolores Medina's chicken fried steak started with the cheapest cut of round steak the butcher had. She pounded it flat with a wooden mallet until it was a 1/4 inch thin, dredged it in seasoned flour, dipped it in egg wash, dredged it again, and dropped it into a cast iron skillet with an inch of hot oil. 3 minutes per side. The crust turned golden, the meat stayed juicy, and the whole thing covered the plate. The cream gravy was made in the same skillet. The dish traces back to German and Austrian immigrants in Texas who adapted Wiener Schnitzel with local beef in the 1800s. By the 1950s, chicken fried steak was on every truck stop menu from El Paso to Little Rock. A plate cost $1.75 in 1965 and came with mashed potatoes, white gravy, and a salad that was just iceberg lettuce with ranch dressing. Texas declared October 26th as Chicken Fried Steak Day. That is not a joke. That is a state holiday for a truck stop meal. Number 11. Patty melt. A beef patty pressed flat on a griddle, cooked with caramelized onions and sandwiched between 2 slices of rye bread with melted Swiss cheese. The bread was buttered on the outside and grilled until it turned dark and crispy. The cheese pulled in long strings when you picked it up. A patty melt at a truck stop outside Bakersfield, California, cost $1.50 in 1970. It came with French fries and a pickle spear. The patty melt was the trucker's hamburger. Same meat, same price, twice the flavor. The rye bread and Swiss cheese made it feel like something a person chose to eat, not just something they grabbed because they were hungry. That elevation mattered at 2 in the morning. Number 10. Pork chop supper. 2 center-cut pork chops, bone-in, fried in a skillet until the outside was golden brown and the bone pulled clean from the meat, served with applesauce from a jar, mashed potatoes, and a vegetable. In the 1960s, pork was the cheapest meat in America. A pound of center-cut chops cost 59 cents. The Iron Skillet and the Country Pride chains built their reputations on this plate. Truckers ordered it because it felt like a real dinner. Not a sandwich, not a burger, a dinner with bones on the plate. By the 2000s, the bone-in chop was replaced with a boneless cutlet that cooked faster. The applesauce disappeared, the plate shrank. The meal that made you feel like you were sitting at your mother's table became a piece of protein on a tray. Number 9. Creamed chipped beef on toast. The Army called it something unprintable. Truck stops called it a breakfast special. Thin-sliced dried beef simmered in a white cream sauce and ladled over 2 pieces of toast. The first written recipe appeared in the 1910 Manual for Army Cooks, calling for 15 pounds of chipped beef to feed 60 men. After the wars, veterans carried the recipe into civilian life, and it landed on every truck stop counter in the country. A plate cost 75 cents in 1958. The dish was salty, creamy, filling, and could be made in 5 minutes from ingredients that never went bad. For truck stop cooks working the overnight shift, this was the easiest hot meal they could serve to a man who had just driven 600 miles in the rain. Nobody ordered it because it was delicious. They ordered it because it was there. It was hot, and it reminded them of something. Number 8. Salisbury steak. Named after Dr. James Henry Salisbury, who wrote in 1888 that ground beef patties could cure digestive disorders. The cure was questionable, the meal was not. A hand-formed ground beef patty, browned in a skillet, then simmered in mushroom gravy until the meat absorbed the sauce, served with mashed potatoes and a roll. By the 1950s, Salisbury steak was on every truck stop menu and every TV dinner tray in America. A plate cost $1.40 at a truck stop outside Fort Wayne, Indiana, in 1963. The gravy was made with real mushrooms, sliced by hand. The patty was formed that morning. It was not a hamburger. It was not a steak. It was something in between that tasted better than either when the gravy was right. The meal disappeared because the food industry found something faster. A pre-formed frozen patty with a packet of powdered gravy that a microwave could handle in 90 seconds. The plate looked the same. The price stayed the same. But the cook was gone. The skillet was gone. The smell of onions browning in butter at 6 in the morning was gone. That is the thing about truck stop food that nobody talks about. The meals did not just feed people. They made a building smell like a kitchen. They made a parking lot off an interstate feel like a place where someone was paying attention. When the frozen patties replaced the handmade ones, the smell left. And when the smell left, the truck stop became just another store. The Salisbury steak did not disappear because it was outdated. It disappeared because it required a human being to make it. Number 7. Chicken and dumplings. A whole chicken simmered in a pot of water with celery, onion, and salt until the meat fell off the bone. The bones came out. Spoonfuls of biscuit dough went in. The lid stayed on for 20 minutes while the dumplings puffed up and absorbed the broth into something thick and golden. Truck stops in the South and the Midwest served this as a daily special, and the pot was empty by 2 in the afternoon every single time. A bowl cost $1.75 in 1972 at a truck stop outside Nashville. The waitresses knew which drivers ordered it every time they came through. They had your bowl ready before you sat down. That was truck stop hospitality. Not a menu, not a number. A person who remembered what you liked and had it waiting. Number 6. Liver and onions. This was the meal that divided every truck stop counter in half. The men who loved it ordered it every time. The men who hated it moved 3 stools down to escape the smell. Beef liver sliced thin, dredged in flour, and pan-fried in butter until the outside crisped, topped with caramelized onions that had been cooking for 30 minutes, served with mashed potatoes and a side of bacon. During the 1940s and 1950s, liver and onions was on every diner menu in America because it was cheap, rich in iron, and the government had recommended it during the war. A plate cost $1.25 at a truck stop outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in 1960. By the 1980s, a generation that had not grown up eating liver refused to order it. The dish vanished from menus so gradually that nobody noticed until it was gone. Number 5. Ham steak and red-eye gravy. A thick slice of cured ham fried in a cast-iron skillet until the fat crisped and the edges turned dark. Then a splash of black coffee went into the hot pan. The coffee hit the ham drippings and deglazed the skillet into a thin, dark, bitter gravy that tasted like nothing else on the menu. They called it red-eye gravy because the pool of fat floating in the center looked like a bloodshot eye. Truck stops in the Appalachian states served this for breakfast with grits and biscuits. A plate cost $1.60 in 1966 at a truck stop outside Roanoke, Virginia. The gravy could not be bottled or packaged or frozen. It only existed in the moment between the ham leaving the pan and the coffee hitting the iron. 5 seconds of chemistry that no food scientist has ever replicated. And that is why it disappeared. You cannot mass-produce a 5-second accident. Number 4. Hot beef Manhattan. An open-faced sandwich piled with sliced roast beef, sitting on a bed of mashed potatoes, all of it covered in beef gravy. In Indianapolis, where the dish was first named in the late 1940s at a deli that no longer exists, this was not a sandwich. It was a construction project. The mashed potatoes acted as mortar. The gravy acted as cement. Truck stops across Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois served their own versions. Some added a slice of white bread underneath. Some served it with a side of corn. But the architecture was always the same: meat, starch, and gravy in quantities that made truck drivers smile. A hot beef Manhattan cost $2.10 on Route 40 outside Terre Haute in 1975. The gravy was thick enough to leave a trail when you dragged your fork through it. Number 3. Biscuits and sawmill gravy. The gravy got its name because it was thick enough to glue boards together. A pound of breakfast sausage browned in a skillet. The grease stayed in the pan. Flour stirred into the hot fat until it turned golden. Then whole milk, poured slowly, whisked constantly, until the gravy thickened into a peppery, sausage-studded blanket that covered 2 split biscuits and most of the plate. Truck stops from Virginia to Arkansas served this as the cheapest breakfast on the menu. A plate cost 75 cents in 1965. The biscuits were made from scratch every morning, cut with a drinking glass because nobody owned a biscuit cutter. Johnson's Corner Truck Stop in Colorado, open since 1952, still serves a version of this alongside their famous cinnamon rolls. But most of the places that made it from scratch are gone. The frozen biscuits arrived in the 1990s, and the powdered gravy mix followed. The meal survived on paper but died in practice. Number 2. Fried bologna sandwich. A thick slice of bologna, scored around the edges so it would not curl, and fried on a flat griddle until the outside blistered and turned dark brown. Slapped onto white bread with yellow mustard and a slice of American cheese that melted from the heat of the meat alone. No lettuce, no tomato, no apology. This was the cheapest sandwich on any truck stop menu, and for decades it was the most ordered. A fried bologna sandwich cost 50 cents in 1960 at truck stops across the Ohio Valley. Truckers called it a trucker's filet mignon, and they were not entirely joking. The bologna came from a whole roll that sat in the cooler and got sliced to order. There was no recipe at all, just heat, meat, and bread. You could order it at any hour, and it was ready in 3 minutes. For a driver running behind schedule who needed something solid before the next 200 miles, 3 minutes was all he had. Number 1. Corn cakes and sausage gravy. Before biscuits became the standard, Corn cakes were the foundation of every roadside breakfast from the Ozarks to the Carolinas. Cornmeal, a little flour, an egg, and buttermilk mixed into a thick batter and spooned onto a hot griddle. They were not pancakes. They were heavier, denser, with a gritty texture that soaked up sausage gravy without falling apart. Truck stops in the 1950s served this as a breakfast plate for 65 cents. The corn cakes came 3 to a plate, each one the size of a man's palm, and the gravy was ladled over the top until the plate looked like a snow-covered field. A trucker named Bill Puckett, who drove routes between Memphis and Little Rock for 30 years, told a reporter in 1981 that he had eaten corn cakes and gravy at the same truck stop outside Forest City, Arkansas, every Monday morning since 1956. He estimated he had eaten more than 1,300 plates. When the truck stop closed in 1989, he said losing that breakfast was harder than any other thing the road had taken from him. That was the truth of truck stop food. It was never about the cooking. It was about the certainty, the knowledge that one place in a world of constant motion would always have the same meal at the same counter, made by the same hands. When those hands stopped cooking, the food did not just disappear. The ritual did. Candy cane fudge bars brought holiday sparkle to every table. Chocolate fudge, soft and glossy, was spread thick in pans before being topped with crushed peppermint sticks. The colors, deep brown and bright red, looked like Christmas captured in candy. Each bite was a dance of cool mint and rich cocoa, bold yet balanced. Children helped press the candies on top, their fingers sticky with chocolate and joy. Mothers wrapped pieces in wax paper and tucked them into tins bound for neighbors and friends. The bars snapped cleanly, each one shining with little shards of peppermint glass. They were a gift that spoke of cheer and warmth without needing a card. In an era when everything was homemade and heart-driven, candy cane fudge bars stood out as both festive and effortless. They brought smiles to faces and sweetness to cold winter nights. One bite and the holidays felt close again. Simple, sincere, and sparkling. Prune whip mold was a dessert-like side dish that found its way onto many 1970s tables. Prunes were stewed until soft, whipped into a light puree, and folded with gelatin and whipped cream. The mixture was poured into molds and chilled until it set, creating a delicate, airy texture. The flavor was sweet yet mild, offering a way to enjoy fruit in a new and interesting form. It was often served in slices or scoops, sometimes topped with extra cream or nuts. Housewives relied on prune whip mold because it was easy to prepare, inexpensive, and could be made ahead of time for gatherings. It appealed especially to adults who appreciated its subtle sweetness and lightness after heavy main dishes. Prune whip mold carried the same charm as other gelatin-based recipes of the era, with the bonus of feeling wholesome thanks to the fruit base. Though it has nearly disappeared from menus today, it once held a firm place as a creative, thrifty, and surprisingly elegant dish for families and guests alike. Peanut butter haystacks were the definition of 1970s kitchen magic. No baking, no measuring fuss, just pure fun in a bowl. A handful of crunchy chow mein noodles, a spoonful of peanut butter, and melted butterscotch chips came together into golden, tangled clusters. They sat on wax paper like tiny sculptures, imperfect yet irresistible. Each bite was salty, sweet, and just the right kind of messy. Haystacks were the dessert you made when company called unexpectedly, or when kids wanted something to help with in the kitchen. They were bite-sized nostalgia, the perfect blend of simplicity and delight. People loved them because they looked homemade but felt inventive, the hallmark of the 1970s sweet tooth. Whether packed in lunchboxes or piled high on Christmas trays, haystacks carried the same message, that joy did not need precision, only warmth. Their crunch was unforgettable, their smell even more so. Peanut butter haystacks may have vanished from modern holidays, but they still live in memory, tangled up with laughter and gold. Avocado pineapple salad was one of those curious combinations that only the 1970s could have produced. Avocado halves were scooped and filled with pineapple chunks, then topped with a dollop of mayonnaise or sometimes cottage cheese. The result was a creamy, tangy, and slightly sweet side dish that looked exotic at potlucks and luncheons. Housewives appreciated it because avocados were gaining popularity and pineapple, whether canned or fresh, was inexpensive and readily available. The pairing of fruit with creamy dressings was a trend that defined the decade, and avocado-pineapple salad fit neatly into that mold. Guests were often intrigued by the unusual combination, and while some loved it, others hesitated at the blend of flavors. Still, it represented the playful experimentation of the time, when food was as much about presentation and novelty as it was about taste. Avocado-pineapple salad, though nearly lost today, stands as a snapshot of a decade that thrived on curiosity and creativity at the table. Pumpkin cream cheese bars were the sweet smell of autumn baked into a pan. Every layer told a story. The spiced pumpkin batter, warm with cinnamon and nutmeg, swirled through with ribbons of cream cheese that melted into smooth perfection. These bars came from the era of baking mixes, when convenience met creativity, and home cooks discovered that a box of cake mix could still feel homemade. They cooled on countertops while the house filled with the scent of Thanksgiving and nostalgia. The cream cheese added richness to every bite, the pumpkin gave warmth, and the blend felt like the comfort of a sweater you never wanted to take off. They were cut into squares, shared at church gatherings, and tucked into holiday tins with wax paper folded between them. For a generation that valued thrift and taste in equal measure, these bars struck gold. Each piece held just enough spice to make winter feel close, and just enough sweetness to make you stay a little longer at the table. Pumpkin cream cheese bars weren't just a dessert. They were the quiet hum of a decade that knew how to make joy from a baking pan. Cheese soufflé casserole was a simplified take on the classic French soufflé, adapted for the practicality of American households. Instead of fussing with delicate timing and perfect rises, housewives would prepare a cheesy egg mixture and bake it in a casserole dish until puffy and golden. It offered the look and taste of a soufflé without the stress of collapse, making it ideal for potlucks and family dinners. The dish carried a rich, savory flavor that paired well with salads, meats, or even just bread. It was hearty enough to act as a main dish, but usually played the role of a side, standing proudly among other casseroles of the era. For families who wanted to bring something impressive to gatherings, cheese soufflé casserole delivered both taste and reliability. Children liked its creamy texture, while adults appreciated the sense of European flair without complicated cooking. Though the soufflé name gave it elegance, the casserole format made it accessible to everyone. Today it is almost forgotten, but in the 1970s it was a proud showcase of ingenuity. Holiday icebox cheesecake was the no-bake miracle every hostess needed. It was cool, creamy, and made days ahead, saving precious oven space for roasts and pies. Cream cheese folded with whipped topping became velvet smooth, poured into crumbly cookie crusts pressed by hand. It was indulgent yet practical, the spirit of 1970s ingenuity. Cooks decorated the top with cherries or mandarin slices, sometimes tinted the filling pink for flair. It lived in the refrigerator until it was time to shine, chilled, firm, and flawless. Every slice was a balance of richness and lightness, of effort hidden behind ease. It became the signature dessert of potlucks and neighborhood gatherings, the one everyone asked for again. The first cool bite after a hearty meal felt like exhale, sweet, airy relief. Icebox cheesecake was more than dessert. It was the taste of modern holiday convenience wrapped in nostalgia. It proved that even without baking, love could still set perfectly. Celery crown salad was as much a visual piece as it was a food because the presentation mattered almost more than the taste. Housewives would take celery stalks, chill them until crisp, then fan them into the shape of a crown on a serving platter. The stalks would be held together with toothpicks or bands and then dressed with mayonnaise or a cheese-based sauce to add flavor. Sometimes pimentos or olives were added for color, turning the plain green into something more dramatic. It was refreshing, crunchy, and light, which made it a common sight on buffet tables crowded with heavier casseroles. The 1970s were a time when appearance at the table held value, and celery crown salad looked like something made with care even if it was simple to assemble. It offered a cool bite that balanced the richness of other dishes, and children often picked at it because of its playful shape. Though rarely made today, it once brought a sense of occasion to everyday celery. Toasted marshmallow pie was a celebration of comfort and creativity. Every slice held the warmth of a winter fireplace, its top blanketed with perfectly browned marshmallows that melted into a golden crust. Underneath, a rich layer of chocolate filling waited, silky and sweet. It was a dessert born from campfire memories, reimagined for the suburban kitchen. Housewives of the 1970s loved its easy magic, a few simple ingredients transformed into something spectacular. Children gathered around ovens just to watch the marshmallows puff and brown, laughing when the sugar bubbled over the edge. Each slice felt like a hug, sticky and soft, a reminder that joy did not need to be complicated. This was a pie that belonged on every holiday table, a symbol of togetherness that looked as festive as it tasted. Long before gourmet took hold, toasted marshmallow pie proved that warmth could be baked, shared, and remembered. Today, it remains one of those desserts that never needed to grow up, the flavor of holidays where wonder was still simple. Lima Bean Supreme was a side dish that took a humble legume and dressed it up for special occasions. Lima beans were simmered until tender, then folded into a creamy sauce often flavored with butter, milk, and a touch of nutmeg. The mixture was poured into a baking dish, topped with breadcrumbs, and baked until golden and bubbling. It transformed the often overlooked lima bean into something rich and comforting, with a texture that appealed even to those who usually avoided them. Housewives appreciated it because it was economical, yet felt dressed up enough to bring to potlucks or serve at Sunday dinners. Children were coaxed into eating their vegetables when Lima Bean Supreme appeared because the creamy sauce softened the flavors and made it more approachable. It was one of those recipes that fit perfectly into the casserole culture of the 1970s, blending thrift with a little indulgence. Today it is hard to find, but it once stood as proof that even the plainest vegetables could be made into something memorable. Caramel apple trifle turned the season's best flavors into a showpiece. Cubes of buttery pound cake were layered with spiced apples, caramel pudding, and whipped cream. Each layer glistened in clear glass bowls, a celebration of color and comfort. It was elegant enough for dinner parties, yet simple enough for home kitchens. The smell alone, cinnamon, brown sugar, butter, drew everyone closer. Every bite was soft and rich, the sweetness deepened by a hint of tart fruit. Families made it for Thanksgiving, Christmas, and every occasion in between. In a decade known for convenience, this dessert managed to feel special without being complicated. It captured the heart of 1970s gatherings, where beauty met practicality and tradition met innovation. Caramel apple trifle reminded everyone that celebration did not need excess, only intention. Served chilled, it tasted like the warmth of a family gathered together, layered, imperfect, and endlessly good. Rumpled beet borscht cups brought an unusual European influence into American kitchens of the 1970s. Beets were boiled, chilled, and pureed into a cold soup flavored with vinegar, dill, and sometimes sour cream. Instead of serving it in bowls, housewives poured it into small cups, offering it as a quirky side or appetizer. The vibrant magenta color made it striking, and its refreshing taste stood out at summer gatherings. While not everyone embraced its earthy flavor, those who did found it invigorating, especially when paired with bread or crackers. Cold beet borscht cups reflected the era's willingness to experiment with international dishes, even if they seemed unusual on American tables. They were considered refined in some circles, a nod to cosmopolitan tastes during a decade of culinary curiosity. For families, they offered variety and a sense of something different from the usual casseroles and gelatin salads. Today, they seem nearly forgotten, but they once represented the adventurous spirit of 1970s kitchens. Orange cream gelatin parfaits were bright as morning light. Served in tall glass cups, they layered orange gelatin with creamy vanilla pudding, a playful mix of texture and color. The contrast made them as beautiful as they were refreshing. They tasted like dreamsicles turned elegant, each spoonful both cool and comforting. For 1970s hosts, they were a way to bring color and joy to the holiday table without breaking a sweat. Children loved the wobbly layers. Adults loved their nostalgic charm. Topped with a swirl of whipped cream and a slice of mandarin orange, they glistened like little suns on the table. The first taste was silky and citrus sweet, a small escape from the winter chill outside. Orange cream parfaits carried that balance the decade loved, playful yet polished, easy but never dull. They were desserts you could see before tasting, and somehow that made them taste even better. Every layer held light, laughter, and the brightness of simpler times. Tomato aspic with shrimp garnish might be the ultimate example of how far gelatin molds could be pushed during the 1970s. Housewives would take tomato juice, mix it with unflavored gelatin, and let it set in ornate molds until it became a firm, jiggling centerpiece. On top of that shimmering red dome, cold shrimp would be arranged in neat patterns, often crowned with parsley for decoration. The dish was tangy, savory, and oddly refreshing, though the texture caught some people off guard. It was served cold as a side or appetizer, sometimes sliced into wedges like a cake. For potlucks and luncheons, tomato aspic stood out on the table because it looked unusual and sophisticated. It was the kind of dish that showed effort and creativity, even if guests approached it with caution. In an era that loved experimentation with molds, this savory gelatin became a conversation starter as much as a food. Though long gone from modern tables, it represents the quirky inventiveness of 1970s kitchens. Banana Cream Delight lived up to its name, every spoonful light, cool, and layered with love. It started with sliced bananas nestled into creamy vanilla pudding stacked between graham crackers or vanilla wafers, then crowned with whipped topping. As it chilled overnight, the flavors melded into something soft and silky, not too sweet but just right. This was the kind of dessert that came out after the main meal, carried proudly in glass casseroles and greeted with smiles. The first scoop was always the hardest, cutting through the neat layers to reveal the golden pudding beneath. Families made it for potlucks, birthdays, and especially holidays when ovens were already too full. In the 1970s, it represented everything good about home kitchens: resourceful, reliable, and always made to share. The bananas browned just a little, but no one minded. It was the taste that mattered, not the perfection. Every bite tasted like memory, soft as a lullaby, and rich as the laughter it was served with. Banana Cream Delight wasn't just a dessert, it was a promise that even the simplest ingredients could create something unforgettable. Golden Glow Salad was another brightly colored creation that turned up at nearly every church gathering or family potluck. It was made with orange-flavored gelatin mixed with grated carrots and crushed pineapple, a combination that blended sweetness with a touch of vegetable crunch. Housewives would prepare it in large molds or pans and slice it into cubes or wedges, sometimes topping it with whipped cream or a creamy dressing. The bright orange color made it visually striking, earning its name as it seemed to glow under the lights of buffet tables. It was sweet enough that children loved it, but the carrots gave it the illusion of being healthy. Families considered it a salad even though it leaned more toward dessert, because gelatin salads were a category all their own in that decade. Golden Glow Salad showed how creative cooks could get with inexpensive pantry items, turning 3 simple ingredients into a memorable side dish. Though it rarely appears today, its place in 1970s potluck culture was nearly guaranteed. Chocolate cherry wreaths were edible ornaments of love and cheer. Drop cookies shaped into small rings, they shimmered with candied cherries pressed on top. Their deep cocoa flavor mixed beautifully with the jeweled sweetness of fruit. On baking sheets lined with parchment, they looked like tiny garlands ready for celebration. The smell of chocolate filled the air, wrapping the house in comfort. These cookies were made for sharing, wrapped in ribbon, placed on trays, given with a smile. They brought color to every cookie swap and warmth to every home. Biting into one felt like biting into December itself, rich, festive, full of heart. Chocolate cherry wreaths were proof that beauty did not need to be grand, only made with care. Their glossy tops and soft centers made them a favorite that deserved to return to modern kitchens. Spanish rice with green peppers was one of those side dishes that showed up on dinner tables and potluck spreads all across the 1970s. Housewives would take plain rice, stir it into tomato sauce, then add onions and chopped bell peppers before baking it in the oven. The result was a colorful casserole that brought together sweetness, tang, and a little bite from the peppers. It was inexpensive and hearty, which made it perfect for families looking to stretch meals without serving the same old plain rice every night. Spanish rice was often paired with chicken or pork chops, but it could also stand on its own next to beans or salad. Some cooks even added a sprinkle of cheese on top, letting it melt into a gooey crust. The dish carried a sense of flair because it looked fancier than it really was, and the peppers gave it a bright edge that guests remembered. Today, it feels like a relic, but in the 1970s, Spanish rice with green peppers was a dependable favorite that balanced thrift with flavor. Corn pudding is a dish that may not have been as grand as the rest so far, but it was a simple DIY casserole that made your day. Corn pudding was made with stewed corn and thickening agents that helped give it a pudding or custard-like texture. However, it was not typically baked in a traditional casserole case. Instead, it had a custard dish that the pudding would go into and then be baked in. Now, down in the South, this was the food gospel. People just loved it all over, especially in less urban areas where corn was widely and daily consumed, particularly during times of economic uncertainty when households had to cut corners in the kitchen. Corn pudding was a cheap and easy-to-make casserole that was not too shabby. Nowadays, people like that have moved more to poaching local wildlife than taking Mother Nature's gifts, and as a result, corn pudding went extinct too. Sitting down and sharing a meal. Old-fashioned divinity candy shimmered like snow caught in sunlight. Whipped from egg whites, sugar syrup, and a whisper of vanilla, it demanded precision and patience. The process was an act of faith, beating, stirring, and waiting until the mixture turned cloud-like. In southern kitchens, it was made by grandmothers who knew just when the weather was dry enough for it to set. Divinity was delicate but proud, its texture melting on the tongue like spun sweetness. Each piece was dropped by the spoonful onto wax paper, crowned with a single pecan. It filled candy tins and mason jars, shared between neighbors as tokens of affection. Its white, glossy peaks seemed almost too perfect to eat, yet they were gone in moments. Making it was as much tradition as recipe, a quiet measure of love passed down through generations. Today, few take the time to make divinity, but for those who remember, one bite recalls Christmas mornings, gentle voices, and sugar that seemed to hold light itself. Frosted lime salad was a vivid green spectacle that lived on buffet tables and Sunday dinners throughout the decade. It began with lime-flavored gelatin, which was poured into molds and chilled until firm. On top of that shimmering green base, housewives would spread a frosting made of cream cheese blended with crushed pineapple. The result was a layered dish that was part dessert, part salad, and entirely a conversation starter. Guests marveled at its bold color and unusual combination of tangy, sweet, and creamy flavors. Children enjoyed the pineapple while adults admired the cool, refreshing texture. It was one of those recipes that fit perfectly into the gelatin craze of the 1970s, where even salads were expected to jiggle. Frosted lime salad carried an almost retro elegance, presented in rings, domes, or squares depending on the mold used. Though its popularity faded, it still embodies the playful experimentation of an era that valued novelty as much as taste. In its own quirky way, frosted lime salad reflected the 1970s at its brightest and boldest. Cherry snowball cookies looked like little gifts dusted in sugar and surprise. Beneath their powdery white coating hid a secret, a single bright red maraschino cherry glowing in the center. Each bite revealed that pop of color against the pale, buttery dough, a tiny burst of sweetness inside something so simple. They were rolled by hand, baked just long enough to stay soft, then showered in powdered sugar until they looked like winter itself. Children loved them because they felt like magic, and adults loved them because they tasted like home. These cookies were part of the 1970s charm. Festive, easy, and endlessly cheerful. They appeared on every Christmas platter beside fudge squares and candied nuts, and no plate felt complete without them. Making them was almost as fun as eating them, sticky fingers and all. Cherry snowballs weren't extravagant, but they didn't need to be. They were joy wrapped in sweetness, proof that the simplest surprises are sometimes the most beautiful. Cauliflower au gratin was a side dish that brought comfort and richness to 1970s dinner tables. Cauliflower florets were steamed until tender, then smothered in a cream sauce heavy with cheese and baked beneath a topping of breadcrumbs. The result was a bubbling golden dish that gave the plain vegetable an entirely new identity. Families enjoyed it as a complement to roasts, chicken, or even pork chops because it added both substance and flavor. Housewives liked it because it could be assembled ahead and baked when needed, making it ideal for busy schedules. It was creamy, hearty, and indulgent, fitting perfectly into the casserole craze of the time. Children who might have resisted cauliflower on its own often enjoyed it baked under the cheese and crumb topping. Cauliflower au gratin proved that vegetables did not have to be boring, and that with enough butter and cheese they could become centerpieces of meals. Though it feels old-fashioned today, it once represented the height of comfort cooking in the 1970s. Golden butterscotch pudding cake glowed like sunlight on a winter morning. When baked, it formed its own sauce, the top becoming soft sponge, while the bottom turned into molten butterscotch. The smell filled kitchens with the scent of caramel and butter, rich yet humble. It was the perfect dessert for cold evenings when family gathered close. Mothers made it in glass baking dishes, pouring hot water around the pan like a quiet ritual. The result was a dessert that looked plain, but tasted like magic. It was sweet without being showy, nostalgic even in its time. Kids would scrape their spoons to reach the warm pudding at the bottom, while parents savored the golden crust on top. It was food for togetherness, not meant for perfection, but for warmth. The 1970s made convenience king, yet this dish still demanded patience, and that was its secret charm. A single scoop brought comfort deeper than sugar could explain, a reminder that joy sometimes hides in the simplest of layers. Apricot rice salad blended sweet and savory flavors in a way that reflected the experimental side of 1970s kitchens. Cooked rice was chilled and then mixed with apricot preserves, chopped nuts, and sometimes a splash of lemon juice. The mixture was scooped into bowls or molded into rings, often garnished with lettuce for presentation. It was both filling and refreshing, combining the substance of rice with the sweetness of fruit. Housewives liked it because it could be made ahead and served cold, perfect for summer gatherings. The addition of nuts added texture and richness, while the apricot gave it a golden glow that stood out on crowded tables. Children found it fun because it felt like a dessert, while adults appreciated the unusual flavor balance. Apricot rice salad was a reflection of the decade's willingness to blur the lines between savory and sweet, salad and dessert. It is rarely seen today, but it once carried pride as a quirky, eye-catching dish that was affordable and memorable. Holiday pecan tassies were the jewels of every dessert table. Tiny, golden, and delicate, they looked like miniature pies kissed by sugar and tradition. The crusts were pressed into muffin tins by hand, filled with a glossy mixture of butter, brown sugar, and pecans that baked into caramel perfection. They cooled on wire racks, their fragrance filling kitchens with warmth that felt like December itself. Women brought them to bake sales, church suppers, and cookie swaps, where they disappeared before anyone could count how many they'd made. Each one held a perfect balance of crisp and chewy, rich enough to taste like indulgence, small enough to justify another. The tassies were made from the heart by hands that measured without spoons and baked with instinct. They represented the kind of craftsmanship that modern kitchens rarely see, the art of patience. For many, they were more than treats. They were holiday currency, traded and gifted with pride. Today, their memory lingers as a symbol of care, reminding us that sometimes the smallest desserts carry the biggest joy. Cabbage slaw with sunflower seeds was a crunchy twist on the classic coleslaw, giving it a slightly nutty bite that made it memorable. Shredded cabbage was tossed with carrots and sometimes raisins, then mixed with mayonnaise or vinegar dressing. Sunflower seeds were sprinkled in, adding both texture and a surprising depth of flavor. This variation became popular because it felt fresh and wholesome, fitting the health-focused trends creeping into the 1970s. It was also affordable, since cabbage was inexpensive and sunflower seeds were widely available in bulk. Families loved it because it paired well with grilled meats, baked chicken, or sandwiches, and it held up well at picnics. It was light but filling, crunchy but creamy, and versatile enough for all kinds of gatherings. Children often picked at the seeds while parents appreciated the nutritional value. Though it has almost vanished from modern tables, cabbage slaw with sunflower seeds once stood proudly as a reflection of the era's push toward foods that felt both homemade and just a little different. Raisin ice cream pie was the dessert of quiet indulgence. Vanilla ice cream softened and folded around raisins soaked in dark rum until plump and fragrant. The mixture was poured into a cookie crust and frozen again until smooth as silk. Every slice felt cool, creamy, and just daring enough to feel grown up. The scent of rum filled the kitchen, mingling with laughter and low music from another room. It was the kind of dessert served after the children went to bed, a secret holiday pleasure for adults. Topped with a drizzle of caramel or chocolate, it looked luxurious, but came together with ease. Its flavor, sweet, spiced, and a little bold, carried a memory of warmth even when frozen. Rum raisin ice cream pie was the spirit of the decade, a little glamorous, a little rebellious, and completely unforgettable. Mock crab salad was the thrifty answer for families who wanted the sophistication of seafood without paying seafood prices. The recipe appeared often in budget cookbooks, calling for shredded vegetables like cabbage or zucchini mixed with mayonnaise and seasoning to mimic the look and texture of crab. A splash of vinegar or lemon juice added tang, while paprika or celery seed provided color and flavor. Served chilled, it was spooned onto lettuce leaves or stuffed into tomatoes, making it look fancier than it really was. Housewives loved it because it gave the illusion of serving something indulgent while costing only pennies. It worked well as a potluck dish since it could be prepared in large batches and kept cool until serving time. For families, it was a playful way to bring variety to the table when fish was out of reach. Though it has mostly disappeared today, mock crab salad captures the spirit of resourceful 1970s cooking, where appearance and ingenuity counted for just as much as actual ingredients. Spiced pear bread pudding was the kind of dessert that made old recipes feel new again. It began with cubes of stale bread, soaked in milk and eggs until soft, then baked with slices of canned pears, cinnamon, and nutmeg. The pears melted into the pudding, their syrup seeping through every layer to create sweetness that felt natural and deep. Served warm with a drizzle of cream, it tasted like comfort you could hold. It was a dish that made use of leftovers and turned them into something extraordinary. A 1970s virtue wrapped in flavor. Families made it after holidays when the pantry was full of odds and ends, proving again that thrift could still be beautiful. Each spoonful carried the softness of pear, the spice of memory, and the weight of tradition. Spiced pear pudding was not glamorous, but it had heart. It was the taste of home, gently reborn in every bite. Mushroom rice pilaf was one of those dishes that showed just how much the 1970s leaned into casseroles as the answer for everything. Housewives would reach for canned mushrooms, pour them into rice, and simmer the whole thing with bouillon cubes until the flavor seeped through. Some would stop there and serve it straight from the stove, but the more popular approach was to pour it into a casserole dish and bake it until the top formed a crust. It was one of those meals that felt just fancy enough for a potluck without costing much or demanding complicated work. The canned mushrooms gave it that earthy taste, and when you added in the richness of broth, it seemed like something better than just plain rice. For families, it was filling and easy to reheat, which is why it showed up on dinner tables again and again. Mushroom rice pilaf sat quietly next to roasts or chicken, and sometimes it even became the star on its own. Today, it has mostly faded from memory, but back then it was a dependable comfort that everyone knew how to make. Zucchini and cheese bake was the sneaky vegetable casserole that showed up everywhere during the 1970s garden boom, back when folks were growing zucchinis the size of baseball bats and scrambling for recipes to use them up. You would shred fresh zucchini, mix it with eggs, shredded cheese, and breadcrumbs, and bake until it turned into a golden, bubbly dish that somehow got even the pickiest eaters to eat their veggies. This casserole was a lifesaver during peak garden season when you could not give zucchini away fast enough. It popped up in community cookbooks, gardening magazines, and handwritten recipe cards swapped over backyard fences. Some folks added herbs or even ground beef to make it heartier, but most kept it simple and cheesy. Over the years, as backyard gardens shrank and prepackaged veggies took over, zucchini bakes like this quietly slipped off most dinner tables. But for the families who remember pulling this cheesy, veggie-packed casserole out of the oven, it brings back memories of homemade meals. Here is my challenge. Make one of these this week, just one. The biscuits and gravy, the chicken fried steak, the fried bologna sandwich. Then sit down at a table, not the dashboard. Use a real plate, not a wrapper. Because these meals were never about the truck stop. They were about the moment when a person who had been driving for 12 hours sat down in front of something hot and felt, for 20 minutes, like they were not moving anymore. Share which one you are going to make in the comments. Tell me if your father ever stopped at a truck stop that had a pie case by the register. Tell me if your grandmother ever fried bologna in a cast iron skillet. Because these are not just forgotten meals. They are proof that the best food in America was never served in a restaurant. It was served at a counter by a cook named Dolores at 2 in the morning to a driver who had 400 miles left to go.